I'm Todd Shipley. I was just on the Smarter Online Safety podcast, and we had a great conversation about online safety and cyberbullying. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi, I'm Art Bowker, and I was just on Smarter Online Safety podcast, and I enjoyed it immensely. Please tune in. It's a great broadcast, and take care.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smarter Online Safety. I am your host, Jocelyn King, and I am thrilled to be here today with not one, but two incredible guests for you. This dynamic crime fighting duo is as good as Batman and Robin, and we are very happy to have Art Bowker and Todd Shipley with us. Art and Todd are esteemed figures in the world of cybercrime investigation and digital forensics, and each of them brings decades of experience and a wealth of knowledge to the field. And today we are going to dig deep into their expertise in cyberbullying and cyber harassment in honor of Stop Cyberbullying Day this month. Let me tell you a little bit about Art. Art Bowker is a seasoned cybercrime specialist with nearly 40 years of experience in law enforcement and corrections and focusing on pretrial probation and parole system. His expertise has been recognized with several prestigious awards in the law enforcement community. He's a lifetime member and former international president of the High Technology Crime Investigation Association, known as HTCIA. And in 2016, he received their HTCIA Lifetime Achievement Award. Beyond his publications, he maintains an active online presence, sharing insights on cyber safety through his blog, The Cyber Safety Guys, and on social media platforms. And with him, his co-author, Todd Shipley, Todd G. Shipley, as there are a couple of Todd Shipleys, is a
True.
globally recognized expert in internet investigations and digital forensics with over 25 years of law enforcement experience. As a detective sergeant, he supervised the financial and cybercrime units for Reno, Nevada Police Department, and he established the state's first cybercrime unit. He served as the director of HTCIA, managing a team that educated U.S. law enforcement on technology crime investigations. He is also the founder and CEO of Veer Software. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
Shipley is also founder and CEO of Veer Software, a company dedicated to developing tools for online crime investigation. He's also a certified fraud examiner and an IACIS certified forensic computer examiner, and he too has received the coveted HTCIA Lifetime Achievement Award in 2023. He was featured also as an internet crime expert in the documentary Deep Web, directed by Alex Winter. And together, both Art and Todd's collaborative efforts have produced two really important books that serve as essential resources, one for professional law enforcement and the other for the general public. And those are Investigating Internet Crimes, An Introduction to Solving Crimes in Cyberspace, and Surviving a Cyber Attack, Securing Social Media and Protecting Your Home Network, a practical guide aimed at helping individuals and small businesses safeguard against cyber threats. And it has step-by-step checklists and real-world examples. I'll tell you guys, that was the book I was looking for when I was under attack by cyber criminals and found it so hard to figure out how to get out of that situation. So you have so much to share. I'd like to ask you to start by, we talked about cyberbullying and cyber harassment, and I was hoping we could start by you explaining the difference between cyberbullying, cyber harassment, and cyber stalking.
Well, let me start by saying they're really a continuum. You start with cyber harassment, and it's the others, cyberbullying, cyber stalking, are really subsets of that. The harassment online, if it's targeting a minor in a cyberbullying scenario, or the more serious would be cyber stalking, where they're using the online presence the online tracking and types of behavior. Cyber stalking would be at the extreme end, but they're really on a continuum. What wouldn't you say, Todd?
Yeah, I think it is. And what people start out not understanding when they're engaging with people online that other people don't have the same necessarily values that they have, and they can make a comment. I mean, if you look at whether you're a child or an adult, where things are on X or Nextdoor or any of the applications that are out there that you can post what you think is an innocent comment, and people will begin to comment back to you. And over a period of time, you've offended somebody, and so harassment becomes them starting to hit back at you and making comments about you. Then they start targeting those comments specifically to you, and then they start trying to look you up and find you on other social media and going after you and stalking you on those other social media. So arts continuum can be very simple comment made by one person that
Right.
turns into something that's far more worse towards the end, and we had no intention of getting that kind of attention from somebody online that we don't even know. And it's
Right.
a terrible thing.
And from a legal perspective, somebody commenting on you even in a derogatory way, I mean, there's really no legal recourse for that, right? Unless it's actually a threat against them. What are the legalities of that? Of
Well,
where do people actually cross a line in the law?
that's the tough part, because sometimes we don't know. And if you don't record or document these things, when you take the one complaint to law enforcement, they're going to look at it and go, it's a single complaint. And it's probably not going to be a violation of law. And each state has different rules and regulations regarding what that specifically means.
I see.
California has been very effective at changing those things and has been the leader in a lot of respect nationally about how to change the laws regarding technology, where some of the other states haven't been as effective and don't have them. So if you live in a state that doesn't have those rules, you may get no response from law enforcement. And that's the unfortunate part.
Got it. And a lot of this has to do with the volume and the fact that it's basically a continuous campaign, right, of some kind. Is that true?
That's certainly more effective way to show that somebody's done something. That there's repeated attacks or repeated comments about you. And certainly if you're underage, if you can identify that's an adult making these comments, that certainly lends itself to a more compelling case that somebody's harassing you or online. Right, Art?
Right.
Yeah, and one of the things that is suggested is when you start experiencing somebody doing this kind of behavior, you put them on notice that this is not welcome, to please
Mhm.
stop, and that sets a baseline for anything that happens after that. That
Mhm.
law enforcement can say this person was clearly offended, felt threatened, emotional trauma was inflicted here, and they just kept going, even though they've been told to stop all communication. So, that's one of the things that we suggest is, make it clear your attention is not wanted. You just to cease contact, cease connecting with me, and of course block them, as much as possible. But you've laid that line in the sand, so to speak, that law enforcement can go back to, and they don't have to wonder, well, did they really know it was offensive, or did they really have a problem with it? By the victim clearly articulating that and documenting it with a
Well, and I
screenshot.
was going to say, so it should be a written thing don't just say this casually and then because then you have
Yeah,
the he said, she said model.
yeah,
Well,
You
exactly,
need to have
exactly.
a written
Yeah.
printout. I texted or emailed or whatever or mailed or whatever they form of communication they're able to do, but to
Well,
make
just
sure you
post
have a
it.
copy of that, right?
Yeah, posting it back on the social media saying this is what I did.
Yeah.
There's a record there. Don't accept it. Go, this is not okay. Don't communicate with me that way.
Right.
And then, certainly block those people. The unfortunate part is people don't spend enough time trying to disengage from these people, and
Right.
then the direct messages start, and then they start looking. These people start looking for them elsewhere, and they start communicating on their other kinds of apps and setting them up for a problem. And people in this day and age have very difficult time just disengaging from social media at all. And the
Mhm.
best thing is just if this starts, just stop social media, close the accounts and move on. And then the people have no place to go that are, targeting you for that kind of behavior. And it's unfortunate though, because we don't. We have to stay engaged. We have to stay with Facebook. We got to do all these things to be with our family. And but you've got to take those steps, like Art said, let them know, disengage, and if it gets bad, contact the police.
Right. Well, the challenge, of course, is especially, for most people in this day and age, but also especially for younger people to say, well, the answer is just to get off of social media. It's kind of like saying you're going into a witness protection program and, you
Exactly.
can't connect the way, because what we're doing is we're taking away the innocent person's right of free enjoyment of their life. And we're still allowing the criminals to take this person and the 100 or 1,000 other people they've been victimizing and continuing that, right? So
Exactly.
it is true. You do want to disappear. And there have been times where I've gone off, and having worked in cybersecurity, most of the cybersecurity professionals I work with do not have social media accounts. And if they do, it's for some kind of research of how bad
Exactly.
social media is, but
Exactly.
they will not communicate that way. So,
but you're right, and Art and I have got children, and we both understand the problems to say, hey, don't do this and get off social media. It's easier said than done. Now, the reality of that is, depending on the age, monitoring your children. If they're older, and younger adults, then it becomes far more problematic because they are not going to disengage from it. And so we've got to talk about how you can stop these people, which goes back to notifying them, disengaging from at least that portion of the conversation with them, blocking them, and not accepting, direct messages from them, to put them, out there. But unfortunately, that just gauges those people to do more aggressive behavior by writing other messages to other people and engaging your friends and other things like that. It becomes a torrid problem with these people if they don't get the response they want from that person.
right. Well,
And
let me ask you. Oh, go ahead, Art, please.
I was going to point out, when you're dealing with kids, um, the kids might not even they're not going to tell their parents.
That's another problem.
And, we bring that out in our book that, there's red flags that maybe something is going on. Maybe they're being victimized in a cyberbullying method, and, they start withdrawing, and, the withdrawing from favorite activities and that kind of thing. Things that tell you there's something going on.
And we're going to get into those because we're not going to leave this episode without those things to watch for, because that's so important, because
but
everybody listening is either a parent or has kids somewhere in their life that they care about. So, yeah.
And we stress it's the communication, open communication with your family members.
Right.
And we get there in the conversation. Don't forget the seniors, because they're often the same kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that was going to be my next question, because, cyber criminals, I mean, it's kind of like, the way people hunt, the way animals hunt packs of animals. They go after the young and they go after the elderly. And the same is true here, unfortunately. And, we all hear the stories. I mean, you two have been involved as investigators and in your law enforcement careers with some horrific incidences, as well as some near misses and successful outcomes. But the culmination of all of that is you've seen, what do people need to be most concerned about and afraid of, and what can they do about it? And so we want to talk about kids, and we want to talk about elders. So since you brought it up, let's go ahead and get into that. So if you have, I mean, there's so many cases too where people have had elderly parents who have then been victimized in their entire life savings is. And I can't tell you, I've talked to far too many people my age who are now not only trying to get their kids through college, but are now taking care of their parents whose entire retirement income was wiped out through cyber criminals. And unfortunately, these things are becoming more and more common. So can you talk about the elder cyber bullying and cyber harassment, and all, we of course know the a lot of the cyber crime topics we talk about in here, like phishing and all of that, but really from the law enforcement perspective, if the two of you could chime in on what you're seeing as the most prevalent things for elder cyber crime that people need to be aware of.
I think probably I would say a lot of it with the older adults has to do with, somebody's posted something on a political platform, and it's not liked by the other political platform,
Mm.
and there's the back and forth, and it gets escalated and it becomes a cyber harassment type situation. Wouldn't you say, Todd? That's one of the common ones that affected the
Very
younger
common.
folks.
I mean, in this day and age, you can't avoid it because that's some of the um, access that seniors, elderly people, um, Art and I are those elderly people, but we've talked about this for so long, we hopefully are not going to be a victim. But they're the ones that are engaging out there and don't know the potential for the problems. They just think they're arguing with somebody online and not realizing that they can, that person on the other end may not hold the same beliefs and may not have the same grasp on reality that they've got. Okay. And those people then go, oh, I'm going to take this person down. And now our, elderly person becomes a victim because they're being harassed, direct messaging, like I said, other locations on other apps that they may be posting on. And all of a sudden now they don't know how to deal with it because they're getting these threads of people saying vile things to them because they had a political view one way or the other. And it's a
They
terrible
have
situation.
they have people who want to do them harm
Oh yeah.
anyway, just because of their political views. Forget their retirement account and forget everything else, but
Well,
just because of
yeah, you're right. That's a whole other side. We're just talking about the harassment part of it, where
exactly.
they've gotten engaged there, and these people are now threatening them, and they certainly don't know what to do because they've never had something like that occur in their life. The boomers and the Gen Xers were raised to respect people, and they just didn't engage that way. Now you've got somebody that is younger that is going to have a different political view that doesn't hold that same beliefs that of respect to seniors or other people online, and they just engage with them, and they're just saying nasty, mean things to them. It happens all the time. I saw it today on Nextdoor. I don't know if you spend any
Yeah.
time on Nextdoor, but that's a whole nother place that's turning into a hate-filled engagement between people if you don't hold the same political views.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's a microcosm. I mean, like on a Facebook with
It's
2 million
supposed to be.
people, you expect that much more anonymity and gosh knows who you're talking, where they live or whatever. But on Nextdoor, you are geographically confined ostensibly. And so you're dealing with people, which is also a little scarier that if you think you've got some, Yahoo, who wants to do you harm. And now you're dealing with somebody who only lives a mile away instead of
Exactly. And it's more likely that they could find you if they wanted to do something. But
right,
they
right.
still people again, and this, and Art and I've talked about this. People engage online
Mhm.
because they have no fear of communicating with that person in real life.
Right.
They can say whatever they want, whatever vile things come out of their mouth, have whatever comment they want to make, because they're never going to see you. And that gives people a certain amount of encouragement to not hold back where we would if we were actually physically with somebody. And
Right.
that's part of the problem.
Well, I did a lot of academic study of all the different generations as well. And to your point, the people that we're calling, retirees, and, at this point, let's just say people 60 and over, they're dealing with, they were raised with civics classes and the idea that you engage in civic discourse and, agree to disagree. But they were raised with debate teams in high school and everything, and
Right.
that you could speak freely, but you're not going to take such offense that you're going to, want to do somebody harm. But it's living in a different world today, and certainly a different online world. So what advice do you have for, especially for not only for those people listening, but for their adult children who are listening, who have maybe their
Good
parents not
question.
listening right now, or their elderly relative who they that care about, or their next door neighbor who's elderly that they care about? What advice could you give them about how to help people, about how to help older people be safer?
Well, I want to bring out the kind of the elephant in the room, the AI
Yeah.
influence. We talk about in our book for particularly the elderly, but also for to instill in children that you need to verify something and just not accept it.
Mhm.
And a lot of these memes and with artificial intelligence, things become blurred about what facts are. And you start spreading one of these memes, and you could lead yourself into trouble. Wouldn't you agree, Todd?
I think that if you talk about what advice to give them, it is that research part. Don't just assume because somebody said something, somebody posted something, somebody gave you a video that it's real at all. And people post those things to get some reaction, and people will do that. And older people don't tend to understand the difference and will react to it, and it becomes problematic for them because then they're starting this engagement with other people that are doing it for what they think is fun, and the senior person doesn't understand that it's not real.
Right. And also, this is not 100% true, obviously, but if it is inflammatory, it's meant to provoke you to a response. It's more
Yeah.
likely to be bait of some kind. And
Oh
that's not
yeah.
to say that an innocent question posted of who do you think should blah, 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 isn't also a trap, but to be aware that the more provocative and inflammatory the question, the more suspicious you need to be. Is that a fair statement?
Oh, definitely. Wouldn't you agree, Art?
Yeah, yeah. And we also talk about cautioning, particularly with the younger adults, is be aware of what groups you're joining,
Mm,
because it may be a group that you think is cool when you're a youngster, but when you go to apply for a job somewhere along the line, that might follow you, and uh, that group that you thought was, oh, this is avant-garde, really cool, might be a problem when you go to get a job at some Fortune 500 company or a law enforcement job. So be aware of the choices you make and what you post in there,
right.
because those will follow you, could conceivably follow you throughout your adult life.
But
Right.
that's a senior issue too. So
Yes, yes.
seniors look at other things like investment advice. The investment advice out there right now is the spectrum of really good stuff and valid people to scams. And I
Right.
know we're not talking about the scam portion of it, but when you talk about what are you advising seniors to be aware of, again, you've got to figure out what's real and what's not. And it's hard sometimes when you get that email, you get that notice from somebody else or something like that. I looked at this, what the investment advice is really about and whether it's valid or not, and that becomes part of the problem too, because you could be investing in something that isn't real, and
Right.
that happens more than it should happen.
Right. No, that's really good. I was just speaking with a friend who just got back from a trip looking at some real estate speculation, and they got there and there was this incredible deal, it seemed, but they had to act that day. And it's like, act that
Never.
day on buying
No.
property.
Ever.
Red flags are
Ever.
going off. They're texting,
Yeah.
what should I do? It's like, no, wait. And it turned out, of course, that what sounded too good to be true was too good to be true.
Of
But that
course.
that pressure and that human desire and the way our brains are wired, to want to act on things like that, it can feel overwhelming. So having that cool calm to be able to say, I am not going to take any action on this. Maybe even like, I'm not going to even respond to this for a day. It's like with any cooling off period or something. What
But
what kind of advice do you have around that?
well, it's hard enough to do that in person to say no to
Mm,
people.
yes.
When they're engaging with you and saying, "Oh, you got to do this right now," because that's their
A
livelihood.
pushy
They know how to pressure
salesperson.
people.
Yes.
But
High pressure
yeah, the
salesperson.
high pressure sales, it's real. But the
Yes.
same kind of things occurs online. Those pressure, they do the same similar kinds of things and get you the multiple emails. This is the deal of the day. This is going to be this. This is going to be whatever. And you got to act now. The same kind of pressure things to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, you're not going to get it. And unfortunately, as they loop people in and they start getting them to believe that the company's real, that whatever the actions they're doing is real, they'll send them more information. Here's the prospectus. Here's all these things that start to look like it's a real thing, and it may not be real.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
I think on that same point is, if you have a salesman show up at your door, you're listening to one person, but in the cyber world, they will use one person and then they will bring in another expert and another expert. And so you've got multiple online folks hitting you with this information. And it could really only be one person, but the
Right.
online environment, you know, allows somebody to be many people.
Okay.
And that's the same thing with the harassment. You could have somebody, you think it's just one person, but they create multiple personalities in that online world and keep attacking the person.
Right.
So it overwhelms them. So, we talk about tightening up your social media, only allowing people to be friends,
Mhm.
locking down your settings, and not sharing too much information. Those
Right.
types of things is kind of a first step in the prevention.
Okay, that's great advice. That's great advice. You started to talk a little bit about like, when children are withdrawing or elderly people are withdrawing, their behaviors are changing. Let's talk about that. What are the red flags that you could spot in a loved one who is being targeted in some way by cyber criminals and being cyberbullied or cyber harassed?
Well, particularly with seniors, because that's, I've always seen that they were an underserved group from even when I was in law enforcement, that the elderly were not being treated well by not particularly law enforcement, but by society in protecting them against that fraud. There
Mm,
wasn't training. I learned early on that if you go out and you train the seniors about how not to be a victim, they tended not to be victims, but they didn't understand. And so some of those things that, particularly for family members to look at the adults in their household is have they stopped talking to them? Have they stopped discussing issues? If they got new friends online, if they got
yeah,
other things that they are not disclosing to them. How come they're short money because they need some funds or they can't go out? Many not be saying anything about the money they've got, but they can't go out. They can't do the vacation this year. Those are going to be those signals that you have to look at and go, why? If you've been able to do these behaviors before, what's wrong now? What's changed in your life that you can't do them? And
mm,
those are the kinds of things that the same typical isolation that we see from manipulators in the physical world, where they move in and take over a person's life and isolate them from everybody else, they do the same kinds of things online and they
right,
isolate him. They say, "Don't talk to him about this. Don't let him know about this. We can't, get this deal to you if you tell everybody." So they start manipulating the situation again, so that you isolate them from everybody else, so that they don't know. And then they start sucking the money away. It's being invested in this. It's doing whatever, and those are the clear signs that something's going on. And it's tough, but you've got to look for them because they don't want to admit that they're
right.
being a victim, and
And it
they
could
probably
be
don't know it
little,
yet.
it could be very small changes in behavior, but
Sure.
consistent and over time, you're seeing a pattern, right?
But the problem is we don't recognize until it becomes a problem. We don't see we don't look for those small behavior changes. It
Mhm,
isn't until 6 months later when they go, "Oh, I don't have any money. I can't do this stuff." And you go, "Well, what
mhm,
happened?" And then
mhm.
if you look back, you go, "Oh, all these things happened over time. And now I recognize what I should have seen 6 months ago."
Right. That happened
And
with a client of mine was going through that with her father had been scammed. And one of the tells in hindsight was, he had been very neat and tidy about his appearance his entire life. And he was growing his hair out. And he had never had long hair in his entire life. And it turned out later it was because he didn't want to pay for the haircuts because
Haircut.
twirling everything away. And so
Yes.
that behavior change, she was going, well, that's odd. He's growing his hair long and into a ponytail. And he's never done that. And he was more of a, short hair kind of guy his whole life. That behavior change, it didn't, it was a red flag to her, but she didn't know what to make out of it. And then
Right.
tracking it back later after all this money was missing to find out that it was, for lack of wanting to spend money on a haircut. She was like, oh, I should have caught that. But you don't know what you don't know until you see it. So when you get the, I guess we're always telling people, your spidey sense is your number one defense here. When something's telling you something's not right, maybe the one clear thing to do is not try to just quickly explain it away. Let yourself sit with that. Could there be something here?
Art can probably address this better than me, but one of the things we talk about in the book is that, not being afraid to engage with the family members because we get embarrassed because we don't want to talk to them about those problems that they might be having. And that's
Mhm.
one of the things that we've got to do. You've got to get out of that shell and, go, what's happening in your life? What are you doing to get them to admit what's happening?
Right.
and the same thing with kids. The behavior changes. Maybe they're not eating. They're withdrawing. Those types of things. There's something going on, and you need to engage them. And this isn't really. It's sort of cyber harassment, but it's more on the spectrum of of I'm thinking of a sextortion, where a juvenile is targeted, befriended, convinced to send pictures, and then the perpetrator blackmails them. And there's a real short window where they like, you pay up this money, or we're going to send this picture to all your kids, becomes or all your friends,
Friends.
relatives, and it becomes such a stress on the child. Unfortunately, there's been cases where they've committed suicide,
Yes.
and so you really need to recognize those areas, whether they be cyberbullying, cyber stalking, or on the other end, a fraud going on. To be aware of those things and engage the family, and engage the loved one, you know, get them to talk like, hey, something's going on. And Todd and I stress in the book, don't shame the person who's been victimized. You don't, like, it's not, even on the fraud cases, it's, these people are very sophisticated at doing this,
Mhm.
and it's not because they're unable to handle their money, although that may be an issue, but it's not. They're a victim, and they should not be shamed,
Right.
regardless of whatever the case may be. If they're a victim of a cyber extortion, sextortion, you get past that and focus on helping them no longer be a victim and
Yeah.
stopping the victimization.
That's such great advice. I often say on here, and I want to say it again, there is no correlation between intelligence and IQ and being a victim.
No.
That's what we
Yeah.
want. Some of the smartest people you'll ever meet have been victims of cybercrime, and
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there are genius multimillionaires who have lost millions to crypto phishing and all kinds of things. So you can be scary smart in several things, but not have domain expertise in cybercrime.
Sure.
And that's why we're here with people, experts such as yourself, who are just such great resources to help everybody be smarter and safer online, because it's just growing, continually. I want to bring up something, and I didn't prep you guys with this question, but I'd like to talk about it because it's hot and in the news. But all these Nudify apps and everything. So you brought up, Art, that people, are being coerced. I mean, there are all these cases of people being coerced into taking a nude picture, or maybe they had a nude or just some kind of compromising picture and it got out, but it was a legitimate picture. But now to have people who have never done that have suddenly see a nude picture of themselves that's been created by an app and be told that that's going to be shared with all of the entire world or their friends. Or I mean, we all know how hard junior high and high school was anyway, without social media and all these problems. And then you add that into it. I mean, that's why it can be life threatening, a life threatening situation for people.
Oh,
What do
yeah.
you recommend for anybody who has, whether it's an actual photo that's going to get released or a doctored photo from a Nudify app, where they literally, for people who are listening and don't know, it's where they use AI tools to ostensibly remove your clothes, and they make you nude, and it's close to what you would look like, though it's not actually you. Any other way you'd describe that, Todd and Art?
No,
Anything to add to that?
no, that's exactly it. I mean, to be real, this is not anything new. I mean, they've had, Hollywood stars for years have had fake nudes posted about them all online.
Right.
What's made it the change is, instead of having somebody that had to have some skills to be able to do that and edit those, there's apps now that'll just do it with the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And that AI is, modeling is made it so much easier. I mean, this whole Reddit threads about how to make nudes on
Mhm.
AI.
Right.
This is a whole methodology in breaking AI to do something it isn't intentionally doing. But the apps themselves that do this are intentionally doing that, and
Right.
it's a terrible thing.
Right.
And I don't know that we have a defense against it yet,
Mhm.
because the only thing, again, it goes back to the part we talked about in the beginning, is getting out of social media, and the kids aren't going to do that.
Right.
So the defense becomes part of the problem. How do we do this? How do we address it? I think part of it is recognizing where you've posted videos, photos online, understanding what's there, and looking for stuff. One of the things, I mean, we don't talk enough about is Googling yourself and finding out what's out there about you, because this
Yeah.
stuff could come out and you may not know it exists
Right.
for months. and then you've got to go back and try to go back and do something with it. So it's situational awareness of what's going on with the stuff you put online, and it's tough, right, Art?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So,
I
so
like,
if somebody, if you're a parent or you yourself are being uh, cyber bullied into like paying some kind of ransom or having to do some kind of quid pro quo in order to not have photos released of you and stuff. If you're ever in that situation where you're being, uh, where you're being manipulated that way, what should you do as a potential victim or as a as a victim in the making? What can you do to protect yourself?
I I would contact law enforcement
Okay.
right off the bat, and I think
Your local police or sheriff, or should you go to like the FBI crime
you should
unit?
start with your local police, but uh,
Always start with your local.
Great.
and I want to stress something. That we're talking about taking pictures and creating pornographic pictures. If that is a child, that's automatically child pornography. That's illegal. Taking a real child's picture and converting child porn. That is a federal offense,
Federal crime.
and that has significant penalties for anyone who possesses those images or creates those. So that,
The Internet Crime Task Force, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Forces take that seriously. So don't think that they don't. I'm sorry for interrupting, Art, but it's taken seriously at the local level.
yeah,
And I guess that's another thing too. Often as a victim or as the parent of a victim, I know this from my own experience and also from other people that I've worked with. When you call into law enforcement, there's a natural tendency, you're almost minimizing what's happening because you're embarrassed. And this is the time that these are the people that you should tell, like you should say, there is child pornography, photography, and coercion going. I mean, you need to throw out the big words. This is the
Exactly.
time to
Oh,
yes,
use them
sure.
so you can
Yeah,
get to the right resources as fast as possible.
sure. And like I said, you got to call police, but you got to stop engaging with these people. You got to not, continue the discourse thinking that it's going to solve anything because these people are going to they're going to either release it or not release it. Paying them, giving them more photos, whatever the blackmail is not going to change what they're going to do. They're going to release it at some point, and they're just going to abuse you more. But
Right.
you definitely got to stop engaging with them. If it's a kid, you get which the advice is tell your parents. Obviously, get them involved. Get the police involved, and even seniors can fall for the same kind of manipulation. It's not just kids, but you've got to tell somebody, get law enforcement involved, and stop engaging with these people, and then collect information about it. But the other part of that we miss, and a lot of times law enforcement has the problem with is they don't have any evidence of what occurred. You go, yeah, this occurred, but because you wiped your account or you did all these things, you don't have any evidence of that. It's hard to tell people to document stuff, but you still got to walk into that law enforcement conversation with, here's what they did, and you don't want to share it. Like you said, you're embarrassed. You don't want to do that, but you've got to walk in and go, here's what I did. Here's the comments. Here's the conversations I had with this guy who turns out to be an older guy now, and I didn't know, so that law enforcement can follow up on that and
So don't
effectively do
clean,
something.
don't clean the digital crime scene and don't use,
Correct.
don't, especially with bleach, just
Yeah,
take all the
exactly.
pictures, take
Yeah.
yeah,
Don't
screenshots of
leak it,
everything.
right.
Okay. Screenshots, printouts.
Whatever you can to make it worthwhile.
Okay. And that's making your case stronger, which
Oh,
means
of
you're
course
going
it
to
is.
get
Because
better
what
help.
it gives law enforcement something to work with, because you
Right.
just say it occurred, they don't have any evidence. But you walk in and go, here's the pictures, here's
Right.
the conversation this guy had with me, and what happened. It's a far stronger indication of what occurred, and they're able then to follow up on whatever social media that process. Now, keep in mind, law enforcement has restrictions on what they can collect and how they can get it. So if they're going to go to Facebook to get something, or they're going to go to WhatsApp or wherever it is, they've got to provide legal service to them after they get a search warrant or whatever they have to get, and that all takes time depending on what's happening. So it's not an immediate reaction. People want it to stop right now, but law enforcement can't work that fast.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, and that's why people need to read your book and resources and look at the vlogs and the cyber guys and look for those tips online, which
Sure.
are very hard to find when you're in the throes of the panic and stuff.
Oh,
So that's
most
why
definitely.
finding a book like yours is such a great resource. That is
Well,
awesome.
it's podcasts like yours. I said early on about education. I mean, if we can educate people not to be victims, they're less likely to be victims.
Yeah,
So if we can get the word out, you can get the word out. We can talk to people and tell them how not to be a victim. I think that's hugely important.
that's awesome. Yes. And we were talking, so we talked about kids, we've talked about victims. What are other things that we should we know about a bit more about how elders are targeted and how kids are targeted, and then like for everyday people. So a lot of, thousands and thousands and thousands of people listening to this are sandwich generation. They've got kids that they're trying to save college educations for. They've got elderly relatives that they're trying to help out with, and help make sure that their financial resources stay intact, and they're busy living their own life and being, soccer parents and working people and stuff like that. Prevention's the best medicine. So reading a book like yours is super helpful. What else, listening to this podcast hopefully is helpful. What else would you recommend that people do to educate themselves? Or what steps should they be taking, like even around their own social media or conversations with family? What other advice do you have?
So, how do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think we start looking at um, being careful what you put online. We've said this for decades now, which I hate to say that, I'm old enough to remember when we were first starting to talk about this, but be careful what you put online. Particularly parents. I mean, in this day and age, like you had mentioned, the morphine the pictures into pornography. Um, Posting pictures online, posting everything about what we do in our life can be that evidence that, or not the evidence, but the tools that are used against us by the bad guys, and we don't want that. So we have to be careful in engaging with people about where you're at. And I mentioned next door. That's local. Everybody knows where you live now, or at least the neighborhood you're in, and so
Right.
it becomes very difficult to not associate you with, where you're physically located. And so that could become a threat, to you physically if you engage people wrongly. So
Mhm.
all these things about how much information we put on there becomes problematic. And so we have to step back and think about what we say, what we post online, the morph videos that are online now, not just the pictures, but the videos where kids are talking about, they get the voice from somebody on a video and are able to manipulate the sound to go with the picture, and they send the video to mom and dad that I've been kidnapped, kind of thing. Those
Right.
things are happening. And
Yes.
so we have to realize what's there. And adults, if they got something like that, would that be something that was real? You have to, look at those things. But there's so much information out there, and there's so many tools that make it easy to manipulate this data. If I want to attack you, it can be done. And that's
Right.
the unfortunate part.
Right. And you bring up a great point. And even on social media, I think a lot of people feel like, well, I'll just only share this with my friends. And let's say you've got 500 friends. The
That's a
problem
lot
is
of
one of
friends.
your friends, Facebook account gets hacked. It's no longer private. People forget that, and I
Correct.
mean, how so many people's Facebook accounts get hacked into it. Again, we always say you're only as strong as your weakest link. You're also only as strong as your weakest friend in social media. So you really just even be careful what you share with friends on social
In this
media.
day and age, you're only
Well,
as strong as your weakest password.
That's true. That is so true.
well, and also, the same thing with the apps. How
Mhm.
many apps are you connecting with? Is your social media account connecting with that you think, oh, this is great, and what's it sharing? You know, you need to really, and we stress that in the book, that kind of a checklist of making sure these accounts are secure. The technical logical aspect.
Mhm.
Making sure everything's locked down the way it should be,
Right.
and that's one of the steps, along with a behavior of not sharing stuff, like Todd said. That everything doesn't need to be shared all the time, pictures, whatnot,
Right.
because those pictures and that information can be used against you.
And Art reiterates that we've talked about that not sharing, but we know that that's not reality. If you look at TikTok, if you look at what's going on in Threads, you look at what's going on in Instagram, everybody's sharing everything all the time. And
Mhm.
so the reality is not what we would like it to be, being that you protect yourself. So you as a user have to start thinking about how and when will I become a victim potentially, and what do I do, and
Right.
how do I plan out dealing with these problems. And people aren't doing that. But I think if we can get out the word enough, you can talk enough about it on your podcast, enough of these groups can talk about it, we can at least shift some of the thinking online about what are you going to do when some, crazy person, decides you're going to be his next target. How do you deal
Right.
with that?
Right. And I guess immediate, so let's cover that so we can wrap, because we've gotten some great tips in here. So number one is you need to be paying attention, particularly if it's loved ones, particularly younger and older, changes in behavior, withdrawing, anything that is not normal for them, and
Correct.
especially that seems almost like there's some kind of depression going on. Be suspicious, because it could really save your loved one and it could save your family. So be suspicious and inquire, and uh, and really keep asking, keep trying to find out why they're changing their behavior, and look for the suspicious stuff. Secondly, you've talked about your passwords, and securing them. Take the steps to do that. We've talked about passwords a lot in here and the things to do. So we have a lot of tips that we've shared. So
Good.
definitely make sure you're being careful of your accounts. You want to be careful of what you're posting. You said a great thing too, and we do this in one of our classes. We have everybody, Google yourself and see what's available. Also, we recommend Google your phone number without your name, because a lot of people will text a stranger but think, well, I'm not giving them my name, but I get somebody's phone number and look it up. I now know where you work out and live. So, you have to be careful of things like that. So Google yourself, Google your phone number,
Well,
and
all
just
the
know
data
how.
aggregators have that information. I mean, if you do Spokio or any of that,
Mhm.
been Verify or any of those, they've got all that information that you can
Right,
pay $5 to get. And that
right.
becomes problematic for all of us because we give away so much information about who we are.
Yeah, that's true. So I'm going to ask you each to give kind of your top three things. And I know you've got even more than that on your checklist. And then besides the one I just covered, which are kind of the one-on-one stuff. So Art, let's start with you. What are your top three things for listeners to be aware of and to do? Action.
Well, obviously, the passwords is the big one. Make sure your settings are locked down, and then don't post what you don't want to get out there. And I think you mentioned about researching, doing a Google search on yourself. I think also keep aware of what's going on in the cyber crime arena. We mentioned some cyber sites, and they talk about this new crime is coming up, and you hear about the different ways AI is being used.
Right.
Keep up with that kind of thing so you're prepared and you're aware of what's going on. Those would be my tips, right?
Good
The
advice.
major ones.
Good advice. And Todd, what would you add to that?
I think being aware of where you are online. I think that sometimes we just think that this online world is one big amorphous, fun place to go do things. The different apps do different things. Art talked about some of the technical parts of looking at the apps and making sure they're secure. But the different apps do different things and they provide different information in different places. Google provides, scans all your emails and they provide you information back on what you think you want based on the emails that they scan. Facebook and all these other ones are doing same similar things. If you're really concerned about what you're doing, move to the apps that are more security oriented. WhatsApp, Signal, those things that are actually doing things. Telegram used to be a great place. For crime, and it still is. But a lot of things are changing there. Um, but there's other things that you can do to protect yourself. Always be aware of like Art said, the things you're posting online, because they can be used against you. And particularly with kids engaging with other people and seniors engaging with other people, you can become that target if you're not careful. And then again, like you mentioned, I teach all the time to law enforcement in particular, and I have them in class Google themselves. And a lot of times, even law enforcement has never done that to find out what's available out there about who they are. And I think that's part of the awareness piece that people need to understand, what information is available about who you are.
Mhm.
It's important to know.
That's awesome. Thank you both so much. And it also sounds like in this day and age, we're kind of back to, if you have a political debate you want to engage in, better done offline where you know who you're talking to than on Nextdoor or Facebook or anywhere else, because
Exactly. I think you're right.
that's just throwing gas on a fire. So there you go.
It is. It truly is.
Well, I can't thank the two of you enough. This has been so enlightening. And thank you for all your years of service to helping our communities be stronger, and for your wonderful book. And Todd, I see you have a copy of it next to you, or is that in your, or
That's, yeah, screenshot off my.
screenshot? There you go. So Surviving a Cyber Attack. And that's available on Amazon. It's a great book. I ordered it and I highly recommend it. And if people want to follow you, Art, you have the cyber guys, the cyber safety guys blog as well. How do people find you?
Both Todd and I are on that blog, the
Yes.
cyber safety guys blog. We post articles of interest on there. We've got all of our social media links, and that's where we've been. I've also been posting any other podcasts I appear on there. So that's one way. I'm also on Instagram, and all the things that we're not supposed to do, I'm involved in.
That's awesome. But you're fighting for a good reason.
That's right. That's right.
You sometimes, as law enforcement, you guys often had to go to the scene of the crime to help people. So there, you're still doing that. There you
That's
go.
truer than people think.
That's awesome. That is so great. Well, and just for everybody listening, when I invited Art and Todd on, I literally had to pick one of the 12 topics we were going to cover today. So I look forward to having you both back for
Sure,
another topic at
definitely.
another time. And thank you for helping us, because at this time with Stop Cyberbullying Day, I can't think of two people better qualified to handle this topic and help all our wonderful listeners who are smart and want to be smarter, and are safe but want to be safer. And thank you so much for helping us stay that way. All right, everybody, this has been another episode. I hope you enjoyed this. And if you know people who need to protect themselves and children and elderly people, please share this, like it. It helps us reach more people. Subscribe, and we can keep bringing more of these to you. And until next time, stay safe out there.